someone can just confirm.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Right, appreciate it. Okay. So I think I've mentioned before, out of some of the CMI modules, I think are less easy, are less interesting than others, and I think that was worded very badly, but this is a good one. That's what I'm getting at. And the reason why I think I like this one is because of the structure it follows. So the first one, I know you're coming into things like different organisation types, and for some people, you know, that's really new stuff, but for others, if you've done business studies A levels, it might be something you've already done. But we're putting it into context. We're looking at management leadership in the sense of an entire organisation and what shapes it, the mission, the vision, the values. So what I like, because it starts off quite big picture, and then we go on the second learning outcome, the second session, when we started to look at different theories, how they're adapted, different types of styles. Do we need to sometimes change it? So we're consulting, other times we're telling. So this sort of whole thing of sort of trying to make sense of understanding how different styles are then how people are impacted by them, actually. So we sort of go from big organisations to like management theories, and then today we look at more the sort of how we actually do it. So what do managers and leaders need to know? How do they need to behave? What's the role of trust? So it sort of becomes more and more practical. So that's why I quite like it, because I think it's got quite a nice mixture of different things that you're looking at. But yeah, if anyone's sort of finding it that they are really struggling, please let me know. We can do a one-to-one. We can talk through your situation and make it really relevant to you. Today we're going to start off by looking at the knowledge and skills that a manager needs. Then we're going to look at communication and the sort of process that takes place there, and how we choose which way, and also have a little bit of consideration of what our preferences are versus what our audience's preferences are, because sometimes people like to be told in a certain way, whereas your preference might be different to that, you know, so there might be a little mismatch. We're then going to look at behaviours. So how do we actually show? There's an expression, I don't know where it's ever come from, that I've heard, that almost it isn't what people say that you almost like turn the volume down on what people say. It's how they behave that really shows you what sort of a person they are. And I think in this environment, particularly where it's more challenging potentially with less face-to-face, then I think behaviour really is showing the mark of a good leader or manager. And then we finally conclude with looking at some models of sort of trust and how that's then used to foster respect and support. And so, you know, how can you actually deconstruct trust, because it's such an intangible and important part of having a good rapport with your team. So we'll conclude by looking at, I think there's two different models that we've got there that we can look at. I think one of them you may have already looked at in a previous module, or certainly will do in a future one. So there will be some overlap sometimes, but we might use similar frameworks, but we might use them in a different way to sort of use them and try and make the most of them in your roles. So we're starting off by my timings thing. I'm so sorry about this. Like, just sometimes do things and then read them back afterwards and they don't make sense. So for the next hour, we're going to be looking at knowledge and skills in terms of management leadership. We'll have a short break, then we'll look at communication techniques before lunch. 12 till 1 we'll have lunch, then we'll go over behaviours, and then we'll look at trust, and then we've done all the contents for the session, and then I'm available if anyone does want a one-to-one afterwards, then we can look at your particular sort of scenario and work on that. Please speak if you've got any questions. I can't see the chat function on my screen, it just shows me the slides and nothing else, so just if you could speak up, or if you can't speak, if someone else has written something, if you could speak on their behalf, that would be great. So knowledge and skills required for a manager. Let's have a little brainstorm. What would you say from your experience? See if we can get to 10. So 10 key areas of knowledge or skills that you believe are necessary for a management or leadership role. So let's go back to your pictures of your letters on your names. So 10. We're looking for 10 management or leadership skills. Anybody care to start? There's 9 of you, so we want 1 each at least.
Understanding of the business.
Okay, yep, fantastic, thank you.
Communication skills.
Business, communication skill. Who was
Trust.
that? Said that? Yep. Communication skills.
Listening.
Very good. Yep.
Honesty.
What was that? Sorry.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Yeah.
That's lovely. That's really, really nice. Sort of core value to have that.
What about understanding of your team dynamics? So understanding of your team makeup.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you think that's harder to do now if you're not seeing them as much, or do you think it's still possible?
I think it is harder because that natural body language and interaction, you develop that, don't you? Whereas obviously us being remote, it's difficult. As it, you know, this is an example, isn't it? We don't know each other's characters because we're all sat in our own rooms, for example. So
yeah, and you don't know what normal is, because I know there's too much talk of that, but actually you don't know the baseline, because if we were on site, I'd know if you were out of character, because I know you well, you know, we will get to know each other quite well. So it's really, yeah, really, really tricky. So yeah, understanding team dynamics. Thank you.
Delegation.
Oh yeah, without dumping. It's quite, yeah, that's a really good skill to have.
Have we done problem solving?
Yeah. Yep. Fantastic. Thank you.
Passion.
Is that because I'm writing them down, so I'm not looking at which letter is pulsing it? Who said, the person who said passion? Were you the same person who said honesty?
No.
Is it different? Oh, okay. Passion. You know, if you don't like your job, this is like, do you think if you haven't got passion, do you think you should still do it?
well, passion could be led from different places, though, couldn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Passion. If you don't like your job, but you've got mortgages, children, for example, and a lifestyle to lead, your passion comes from a different place, doesn't it? If that makes sense.
I do think this idea of something energised, though, that passion gives you, is something that people can really buy into, isn't it? So it's quite difficult if you've got somebody who isn't aligned. It's tricky, isn't it, to be led by them or motivated by them, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it depends on the job as well. Passion's sort of more necessary for certain jobs. Sort of a nurse or doctor, you'd want them to be passionate about what they're doing. But
yes, yeah,
maybe someone working in a warehouse maybe doesn't need it as much.
Yeah, I totally relate. Understand. But also I think there's different personality types. It's almost like stereotyping, but certain roles, like you wouldn't necessarily expect someone like sort of in accounting or technical to demonstrate the same levels, but it doesn't mean it's not possible, does it? It's just sort of different cultures within different areas, I suppose, and industries. Okay, passion, brilliant. Any others?
Conflict management.
Yeah. Does anyone actually enjoy that?
I don't mind it. I'm not shy of it.
Oh yeah, and how do you go about doing it then?
Well, like you say, you somewhat stereotype people, and you work out their kind of the personalities. People sometimes take criticism in different ways. There's different ways of monitoring it and challenging it. Some people, it's better delivered if you keep remote and you email or phone. Some people prefer face to face. I think it's about being clear, concise,
and also fair as well, isn't it? Because there's a huge, if you're in that role, you're in a position where you can almost, it can turn on you, can't it, if you aren't seen to follow the right process. If that makes sense. Okay, yeah, good, really good points. Okay, fantastic. Any others?
Empathy.
Oh yeah. That reminds me, do you remember the country club manager? The sort of one that had quite a lot of empathy, didn't they? Where, do you remember the styles where we were talking about? There was 4 quadrants and there was one in the middle, and there was sort of whether they were task or people, and the ones that were sort of almost very people focused with the country club managers that had really high levels of empathy with others. Okay, fantastic, thank you. Any more? Okay. So when we look at this, we've started off understanding the business. So what level of the business or the role, what level of technical knowledge do you think someone needs to have in?
I think you've got to have enough experience to understand the risks. So
Okay.
you might not be like, you might not have all the like fully in-depth knowledge technically of how stuff is done or what needs to be done, but I suppose it depends what role you're in, because you might be setting processes for your team, so you'd obviously have to have knowledge. But
yeah,
I think as you start to get higher up, then it's more knowledge of what can go wrong and how to manage it.
Yeah, and I suppose which resources to use as well, potentially. Because yeah, as you're right, the more elevated you get, the less likely you are to have technical expertise, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Who mentioned, was it Lucy, was it yourself that said understanding the business, or was it someone else?
No, that wasn't me.
Okay, who was it who said understanding the business? I think it was a female voice. Is it you, Kirsty?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you did. Did you have anything specific in mind for it?
I just think like, I think you notice when like a new manager comes into post, it's not their fault, they've got to learn it, but you sometimes have less, I don't know how to put it, like, because they don't understand the business, you can have those conversations and they might tell you stuff that they don't know, but you know, and then it loses a little bit of assurance in them doing it. Not saying that's right for a new manager, because obviously they've got to take time to learn it, but you want to be able to like trust your manager's knowledge so they can support you. Yeah,
so it's about credibility, isn't it, really, with understanding how things are done as well, isn't it? It's not just the formal stuff, it's it sort of can undermine them. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So let's have a look. So the other things we got, they were quite soft skills actually. So communication skills, trust, listening, honesty, understanding team dynamics, delegation, problem solving, passion, demonstrating passion, conflict management, and empathy. Let's have a look. They're really good, because I think there's very few technical skills that all managers need to have, which is pretty much what we've just said in terms of what skills we're actually looking for. So if we go through, in terms of knowledge, we've got, it depends on the role. So just what we're saying, it depends on how high up you are. It depends on if you've got a specialist team where actually you're seen as the subject area where you're signing off on things, you need to have a lot of knowledge there. If it's an area with a lot of risk, then so the actual, almost like the testable knowledge will very much depend on the role that we're going into. And then the skills, this is where we've got a lot more on this. So we've got, again, it could be quite technical skills, like sort of to do with data or security or technology. However, it also can be around project management. No one said about managing change, did they? I don't think. But I think certain aspects that you were talking about, change is just the thing that it's sort of ongoing. But there was a lot of different skills connected with managing teams. So you've done reflective practice, haven't you? You've done it on a previous module, 525.
Yeah.
Did you start on that one? Okay. Can you remember what model, any of the models that you used for reflective practice? Does anyone remember Kolb's cycle?
I think a lot of us remember John's. I think John's was the one that sticks out, if I remember rightly.
Okay. Why do you think, to be a good manager or leader, do you think it is necessary to practice reflective practice? Now you've studied it, do you reckon are you sold, or are you still skeptical?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite important. Like, I found that sort of whole bit quite useful, like even for yourself to like understand your own way of learning, and it does make you think about your team when you're doing it. Like I'm quite a chatty person where people in my team are quite quiet, And I have learned that, but it highlights how you have to learn to speak to people differently to get the best out of them or understand how they work.
Do you feel it slows down the process a little bit by being more reflective? Do you think it makes you less action focused?
Yeah, I think you can kind of think more before you want to say stuff. So you kind of try and read into it more maybe than when you would just go on and do stuff and get things done.
Yeah.
You're being a bit more conscious of each decision.
Yeah. So my next level up manager at CU Coventry allocates every Friday afternoon to reflect. And when he first told me this, I was a little bit sort of aghast, really. I was like, how have you got time? It's bad, isn't it? Because actually what he is implementing is best practice, because he thinks about what he could have done differently, you know, what went well, that sort of thing. And I think building in that thinking time gives him the chance to perform the best he can. Do you think it always feels realistic in certain roles or environment to actually have that space or to build it in, or do you think it's more challenging in certain environments?
From my experience, it is a really good tool.
Yeah.
Where I struggle with is it's in the short term, it actually adds to your workload and makes it difficult to find that time to do it. But obviously, by doing it long term, you can improve. But because we're very reactive and everything just sort of flies at you, I struggle to find the time to fit it in.
Oh, this is what I was getting at, and I'm not being cynical. So Jo absolutely loves it, and it's sort of totally the way that she does it. And I think as well, there's something on reflective practice. I think it depends on your natural pace. So if you're quite a fast-paced sort of in terms of action focus, like to do, you know, it's much harder, I think, to sort of build it in, because it's not a natural thing. You might do it, but it just might not be in a sort of a formal way that you're doing it. And particularly if you're in a reactive, as you say, if you're reacting all the time to things, you may not even see the same benefits, because it's not like you're doing the same thing time and time again, in which case you can learn and then implement things, is it? Because you're constantly having to adapt your strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with this, right, when you're answering it, let's go to the, let me just have a look at the template that I set up for you. So we've got assess the knowledge and skills required for a management role. Gosh, 275 and 325. So you're not talking many paragraphs here. So you need to pick on a couple of these that you think would be useful. Either things that consider your role that you think are particularly, or your area, or even things that you feel aren't done, but yeah, they could be of benefit. So we'll go through a few key ones and then just pick the ones that you find easier to sort of connect with, really. I'll carry on. So we will go through, because there's more detail on some of these, and there's a video on strategic thinking as well, which is quite good. Obviously, there's always, in a management role, there'll tend to be some sort of operational, making things happen in the planning, delivery, the resource, etc. People, even if you haven't got a direct team of people that you're managing, you're still in some ways going to be having to influence or to sort of conflict manage people, or and instill those values of trust and what we heard about initially. And then it will always be to improve things into what it should be through some sort of level of change. So have you ever seen this in terms of time management before, this matrix?
Yeah, I've seen it. My manager actually suggested for us to do this, to prioritise our work, and it's quite useful tool.
Do you do it continually, or do you tend to do it if you're overwhelmed, if you want to get rid of some stuff?
I'd say when I have a to-do list, a daily to-do list, and when I'm organising my priority, I kind of picture the box in my head to push it to the top. But yeah, no, when things do get overwhelming, I definitely do refer to this, but I don't actively, put the things in the squares now. But it's a good thing to have in the back of my mind when prioritising stuff.
What I like about it is what you've got to think about is who's it important for. because quite often people will give you their things that are important and urgent, but they're not necessarily yours. So actually, you've got your to-do list for the day. Do you get this? And then someone else will give you something, and it's sort of almost, if you're in sort of quite a highly stressed state, you can try and just clear stuff all the time, so you're reacting, but you're not prioritizing. Does that make sense? So you're sort of working to other people's, and there's got to be a level where you have to respond. So I'm not saying that, but it's the sort of division between reactive and proactive time, isn't it? Does that make sense?
I find that because I'm like a PA to the director.
Yeah.
And like the management team. So like, although I've got my own work, which is sort of there behind the scenes stuff, if they have something that's stressing them out, it comes straight to me, and this has to be done now. And then everything I do, and I feel like every day all I do is react to the current day, because most of it's this needs doing, this needs doing, this needs doing. And then everything just drops off my list like later in the week or the next week, and you're just constantly rolling over your work which is probably not as important, but it still needs doing.
Yeah. And do you feel a level of frustration with that, or that you're just not achieving what you want to do?
Yeah, I feel like every day I'll have my list of to-dos, and they never normally get done because everything that comes in that day kind of has to get done.
Yeah. And I suppose with their level as well, you know, at a certain level, everything is important and urgent, isn't it? That's how it feels because of who it comes from.
Yeah,
so you can't exactly challenge them back, can you?
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's obviously it's their deadlines, and that's your job, is to support them. So you've got to do what they need doing.
Yeah, is anyone in the position where their workload is more self-managed and they're almost less reactive to things, where the majority of what they do, they feel they've got control over?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I just do what I want.
Do you? How's that feel for you?
It can be a bit directionless at times.
Really? So you don't have enough stress then?
I like it when I've got a bit, but yeah, no. I compared to some other people, I don't envy them, but I think because I'm kind of, I'm not I'm on my own sort of thing. I'm developing schemes for a team that doesn't have that knowledge and that experience. So I'm that person that's got that.
Yeah.
So I just manage my own projects. They tell me what they want to do. They go, oh well, we want to build this scheme here, and I go, right, leave it with me, and I do everything for that project. So I am busy, but it's
no, I know exactly what you're saying.
At my own pace.
Yeah. Okay, that's quite a contrast, I think, to different people's. So this could be one that you talk about, because as I say, I think in this one, if you can probably talk about 3 different skills or knowledge base here, that would be more than enough. I think 3 would be great. I want to show, there's a video on strategic thinking. I just want to check when I screen shared with you whether I put the sound on, because if I didn't, you can't actually hear it. So we do click sound. Let me just watch this. So basically this is about categorizing what type of strategic thinker you are. So if we just watch this, and if you don't mind just sort of having a think and see where you fit in on this. We'll just check when it comes up whether you can.
Do you get it?
Right. Did everyone hear? Do you get it? Did you hear his voice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right.
Yeah.
Translation. Are you strategic? How often have you overheard a group talking about a leader and saying, he just doesn't get it? Do they say that about you? Well, are you tactical or strategic? Does it even matter? 4 separate studies on leadership published in the Wall Street Journal, Chief Executive Magazine, HR Magazine, and the American Management Association all showed that the #1 most valued skill in leaders today is strategic thinking. Unfortunately, recent data published in the Harvard Business Review shows only 23% of US executives are strong at strategic thinking. Couple that with the fact that bad strategy is the #1 cause of bankruptcy, and you have a deadly combination. So yes, the ability to think strategically is essential for individuals and organizations. The real question is, how can we continually sharpen our strategic thinking skills to not just survive, but to thrive? The fact is, most managers are now required to be more successful with fewer resources. All managers have resources, time, talent, and capital to varying degrees within their organizations. So technically, all managers are strategists. The reality, however, is that not all managers are good strategists. Herein lies the pearl of great opportunity. The deeper you can dive into the business and resurface with strategic insights, the more valuable you'll become to your organization. Strategic thinking is defined as the generation of insights on a continual basis to achieve advantage. Strategic thinking is different than strategic planning. While strategic thinking is the generation of insights, strategic planning is the channeling of those insights into an action plan to achieve goals and objectives. A key distinction between strategic thinking and strategic planning is that strategic thinking should occur on a regular basis as part of our daily activities, while strategic planning occurs periodically, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. You've likely noticed during your daily encounters with bosses, colleagues, direct reports, customers, suppliers, and other individuals that strategic thinking comes in varying degrees, ranging from brilliant to non-existent. To help understand the concept of strategic thinking, I've taken the results of research with managers from 154 companies and have identified 4 types of strategic thinkers. 2 criteria to consider as you evaluate an individual's ability to think strategically are the impact of insights and the frequency of insights. Using the analogy of underwater diving, there are 4 types of strategic thinkers. The first type is the beach bum. Like a beach bum, this manager mentally lounges around and doesn't really contribute any insights to the business. The second type of strategic thinker is the snorkeler. This type of manager skims the surface of issues. They're the first one to wave their hand in the air and say, "We have a problem," but don't offer any potential solutions. The third type of strategic thinker is the scuba diver. Like a scuba diver, when these managers are equipped with the right tools and instruction, they can come up with strategic insights. The final type of strategic thinker is the free diver. A free diver can dive underwater to depths of 800 feet on a single breath. These managers generate new and impactful insights for the business on a regular basis. The research shows only 3 out of every 10 managers are highly strategic or at that free diver level. The reality is most people can't hold their breath for more than 1 minute and 30 seconds, but the world record for a free diver holding his breath is 11 minutes and 35 seconds. So why is there such a big difference? Free divers have learned and practiced breathing techniques. They've learned how to use their resource, oxygen, more effectively than the rest of us. In business, strategic thinking is your ability to use your resources, time, talent, and budget more effectively than the competition. To help managers at all levels think strategically, I've developed the Strategic Thinking Disciplines Framework. The 3 disciplines of strategic thinking are acumen, the generation of key business insights, allocation, focusing resources through trade-offs, and action, executing strategy to achieve goals. Discipline number 1 is acumen. One of the interesting paradoxes of strategy is that in order to elevate one's thinking to see the big picture, one must first dive below the surface of the issues to uncover insight. A strategic insight is a new idea that combines 2 or more pieces of information or data to affect the overall success of the business and lead to competitive advantage. An iceberg illustrates a universal phenomenon when it comes to insights. If the iceberg represents the body of insights for a market, too often companies battle one another using information represented by the tip of the iceberg, which is readily available to everyone. Hidden below the surface are insights represented by the largest portion of the iceberg, which are the more difficult to see and more valuable to use. The acumen question: what's the key insight driving this initiative, project, or activity? Discipline number 2 is allocation. While it's one thing to have a neatly written strategy on paper, the truth is the actual or realized strategy of an organization is a result of the resource allocation decisions made by managers each day. Therefore, it's critical to have a firm understanding of resource allocation and how to maximize its potential for your organization. With multi-billion-dollar companies going through bankruptcy on a regular basis, it's evident that having the most resources guarantees nothing. It's how we allocate resources that truly matters. Once the insights have been generated through the acumen discipline, one is the key ingredient in making resource allocation decisions. The definition of strategy begins with the intelligent allocation of limited resources. Resource allocation is at the core of strategy. Discussions of strategy boil down to how to allocate limited resources to maximize business potential. The allocation question: what trade-offs will I make to focus resources? And finally, the third discipline is action. It's often assumed that once a sound strategy has been formulated, the execution of the strategy will take care of itself. Research seems to indicate otherwise. A survey of more than 400 companies published in Training and Development magazine showed 49% of business leaders report a gap between their organization's ability to articulate a strategic vision and their effectiveness in executing that vision. The action question: what actions can I take to achieve advantage? Most books and training programs only address the first 3 levels of strategy: corporate, business unit, and functional. But these are all subsets of the most important level of strategy: you. The individual level is where strategy is really created. Unfortunately, 90% of directors and vice presidents have never had any learning and development opportunities on strategic thinking. The good news is that by developing your strategic thinking disciplines, you can elevate yourself from tactical to strategic. The better news is that in doing so, not only will you become more valuable to your organization, you'll separate yourself and your business from the competition. Do you get it?
Do you think all managers, oops, sorry, let's stop for watch something else. Do managers actually need to be strategic? Or do you think strategic sits more with leaders, or how do you see its relevance?
I think like it depends what level of manager. I suppose like at more of a team leader level, you'd expect them to have a bit more, but as like a lower level manager, you kind of just need to understand like the direction more than actually be as strategic. And a bit about saying that they managers are meant to be more successful with fewer resources is quite interesting, because it's quite true, isn't it? You're expected to kind of do a job and manage, not just manage people, which a lot of people get lost in their day job, don't they? And the management becomes quite hard to do.
Michelle, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it's a sort of balancing all these sort of agendas. Michelle, you got your I'm not used to seeing hands up. You got your hand up. Did you got?
Yeah, from a traffic officer point of view, our job that we do is very tactical thinking. And when I stepped up to be team manager, it was strategically thinking. So you're thinking of the bigger picture, thinking of the overview, and not where you are. You're thinking of other places, other resources.
Right. Okay.
So it's the same sort of premise of tactical thinking, because you're acting on what you're doing, but it's more of a bigger overview. You take into business needs more than just doing the job that you're supposed to do. You've got to think of the objectives, etc.
Okay, and when is that more what appears in the remit of the role, or how's that? Because that's that. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. That sort of step up. How is it when you sort of going for the interview? Is that what they're asking of you, or is it sort of the behaviours you're expected to show, or
Yeah, when I've gone for interviews for the team manager role, on the feedback I've been given, like, you need to think more of an overview sort of point of view, because it's very difficult to get at the traffic officer on the floor, tactical, boots on the ground view. Yeah. To then start thinking, well, what else do we need? What other things do I need to think about? So I've took feedback from that, and Yeah, it's definitely a different
mindset, isn't it, by the sounds of it? Okay, because that's what I was sort of thinking when I was watching it. I was thinking, actually, I just think at certain levels you are more operational, aren't you? At other ones, you need to be aligning closer. And I imagine that as you step further up and up, that the strategic shift would go, wouldn't it? Different, do you think? As you take more responsibility on. Okay. So how do you demonstrate this if you're trying to progress your role within the organisation? How can you evidence it if you haven't had the opportunity? Do you think there is opportunity lower down to demonstrate strategic thinking?
There is, but it's not going to be given to you. You haven't
got the authority, have you, really, to act? No. Would you be given the full picture as well, the information?
I don't think so. I think a lot of it you have to find out for yourself. Okay.
So I think that's an interesting, thank you, because that's a really good point. I think that's a really interesting one. If you wanted to bring it up in the assignment, the reason being, I can understand in principle why it's expected to be, particularly for a leader, a leadership skill. However, in practice, I think it could be, it's not through inability, it's just like practicalities. You might not have the power or the access to the information to actually do anything with it. So you could talk about strategic thinking and where that's relevant within your organisation. Hopefully this is one that you recognise. If it isn't, just bring in from a reflective practice. If you want to use that, then you get a chance to reuse something from your previous assignment in terms of, but you need to adapt it for this one. So we're talking about how a manager would use reflective practice. So if you just look at your previous one and maybe choose one of the models that you liked in terms of that and how that will benefit them. So in terms of this 3.1, you could happily go in terms of also include one of the things like listening or honesty or understanding team dynamics. So if you want to explore that more, that's absolutely fine. As I say, I think 3 would be great. 2 is absolutely fine. But you could use in terms of knowledge. So I'm thinking 2 or 3 total in terms of knowledge and skills, not 2 or 3 knowledge and then 2 or 3 skills, because otherwise you'll not have much scope to say anything. I think knowledge, we had a really good opening on this one in terms of the organisation, how it runs, the dynamics within it, because if you have got someone who's a new entrant into it, sometimes that gives a fresh perspective because they're questioning why things are happening, but other times it can undermine their level to instruct anyone, because actually people are thinking it's not going to work because you don't understand how it flows around here. Could be legal, could be technical, could be technological, could be, there's so many different, so there might be specialist skills that you need. Do any of you have that in any of your roles where you've got a specialist knowledge that's essential to be a manager or a leader in your area?
Yeah, I'm the engineering team manager for drainage, so I have to have an understanding of how drainage works.
And if you didn't, like, do you think people would take them,
I think it's more that you struggle to understand the priorities and what work needs to be driven. Not
you couldn't look over anything, could you? You couldn't sort of give any added value, could you? So yes, so that's a perfect example of where you need that specialist knowledge. So that would be a really good one to put in there. So skills then that we can talk about, I've shown you the sort of time management matrix. I think that works quite well. We've looked at the reflective practice from the last time. We've got strategic thinking. Project management could be another one that you're talking about. In terms of this one, it's quite, I was going to say vague. It's not necessarily vague. It's just you've got quite a lot of scope here to add in sort of different things that will relate to your role as a manager or leader in terms of the knowledge and skills. Do you think, so communication skills, we're going to move on to communication, the next one, so maybe leave that for this one, just so that because in 3.2 we're going to be talking about communication. And then I think, right, the issue we've got with this one is just when we move on to the final, I think it's like out of all the ones we're doing, it's the one but last, we're looking at behaviours, and some of the things are, it's difficult to know whether it's a knowledge, a skill or a behaviour, because so you might sort of have an idea of 2 or 3 that you're going to do now. We know knowledge can be quite specific, but we might choose to put them in the behaviour bank rather than the knowledge or skills bank. Do empathy, someone mentioned empathy as a skill that's required. How easy is it to develop some of these skills? Trust, honesty, how do you think they can be? Do you think they're very personal? Do you think they can be developed within managers and leaders?
I think they can be developed, but I think it takes a lot of like reflection. Like I think I look at when I started at Highways, and I was very like, you wouldn't understand like the people side of the business. I mean, I come in as an apprentice, so it's different. So I'd be like, oh, why is that an issue? And oh, you know, so you wouldn't actually understand people maybe, and it takes time to develop your own skills in like understanding people's circumstances. And maybe when you're like young and you haven't been through like the life issues that you go through as you get a bit older, you kind of understand people have a personal life that can affect their life. And if you don't give your team the like understanding of their circumstances, you can listen, but if you don't actually understand or try and help, you know, support them, then you don't feel listened to.
And that's quite interesting, because it's whether you can develop skills or whether it has to come from some level of experience and time, doesn't it? Because I think there's in terms of management leadership, there's sort of debates around almost prejudice that's against younger managers actually about sort of limits there, but whether that potentially is linked to the fact that they may be seen as having less experience of situations.
Yeah, well, I'm 26 and I became a manager like a year ago, so 25. So I think since I've started managing, I've had to adapt the way I manage because it is that understanding. And I've had to do a lot of reflection to like get to that point of being like, you've got to understand people to manage people, and it can be quite hard.
Why will people open up to? Because I think some of the things we've talked about, like understanding the team dynamics, the conflict management, empathy, I think they actually come from a point where your team are open with you. And I know we're going to look at this in terms of trust and openness. How, as a, you know, what can you do to, and what level should you expect people to be open regarding things that potentially aren't necessarily work-based? You know, what can managers do there? Because it's I think it's tricky, isn't it?
I used to be very like work driven because we had loads of tasks. So all I'd be doing is sending everyone tasks, when actually you've got to build that relationship first and understand what tasks each people are better at, and then you learn to deal with them better, and obviously ask them questions and be a bit more, how's your day? You know, those little basic conversations which help build that like rapport with your staff.
Okay.
To maybe get more from, you realise you get more from them that way, as a being more supportive, really.
So a task team sort of balance, isn't it, really, between the person and the task? Has anyone got any sort of, in terms of how open their team are with them, sort of anyone got any experience of like anything that they can share in terms of how they've created or fostered that, you know, what values that they show that means the people are open with them?
Sorry, can I just double check? Is this still for this question, or have we moved?
Yeah, this is just in terms of, because actually interpersonal skills, some of this might come on to behaviours, and it might come later down, but it's all on this task 3. But this is around like how, in terms of interpersonal skills, because this is one of the things. So when I come on to this slide here, this is like almost a checklist of anything you can use to answer this question. So anything under the bold text is what CMI have provided and said any of that's okay. So even if you got duplication for behaviour, they've said we can use any of this. So you could talk about interpersonal skills, and this is the one I was trying to sort of almost how do we create, or how can we develop people to not just have more experience but interpersonal skills? How do we create an open rapport? Because that will tie into a later one as well. So that there is, sometimes it does feel like you're answering using the same thing, but as long as it matches what we're able to say, which is here. It's fine. Okay. So anyone who's sort of managing a team where you find they're quite open with you and you're able to, why do you think they trust you and not someone else? Or why do you know, how do you think you've got to a position of trust with your team members?
I like to think like my team are quite open with me, and I think that's sort of grown over the years through a lot of support and providing assistance, and not necessarily when things have gone wrong, not pointing the finger at them and helping them get it sorted rather than worrying about blame and just things like that, really.
And yeah, very good sort of examples, really. Has anyone else want to?
I think for me and my manager, I get the impression that she genuinely cares, and I think it's stuff like it sounds a bit weird, but she knows kind of about my family life. She knows who I live with and kind of what I get up to in my spare time, and I know it back, so we can have those non-work conversations and build up trust like that. And so I know we've been working from home and stuff, but she, in a way, kind of, if something's going wrong or in my personal life, I get the impression that she understands that, and it's the empathy, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's how that's how I've built up the trust with her. I think it's that personal level, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I know it probably will be difficult, and you have a lot of direct delegates. So yeah.
Yeah, and so we are going to come on to this when we look at the sort of behaviours and trust, but there's a level, I think I find it quite interesting that with trust, I think there's a level of vulnerability, but it's both parties. So you can't, if you're quite open, but then you'll get nothing back. But then there's a sort of old school management thing, isn't there, where you sort of have to behave in a certain way. Certain people have thought that, but then it doesn't necessarily lend itself to having an open team. Do you see what I mean? Like, because as you're the manager, you sort of almost feel like you should not necessarily. I don't know.
A friend.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because when I've had sort of small teams that have worked for me, it's almost like I'm not there because yeah, but by the same thing, then they can't. It's a difficult balancing act, and I think what we heard from one of your colleagues as well is it's built over time. And I think through that, it's this idea, and it's just as simple as feeling like they've got your back. They're not going to do something that undermines that trust in you. And I think that comes through time. And I think it literally is just something almost like it's a personal reputation. That's you've got your own brand, and then you've got the organisation you work for, and you as a manager, as you move around, you know, will have stories told about you in terms of like how you've responded to things, and they will shape the way that people respond to you and how much they trust you. So it all it's very, very subjective actually, isn't it? Because it's quite difficult. What works, one style that works for somebody might not necessarily work for someone else, which ties back to that previous, you know, the last session we had with all those different management styles. So it's a difficult one to get it right for everybody, especially when you say you've got a larger team of delegates. So we've got some, have you got out of this, could you pick 2 or 3 things, do you think, to talk about in terms of knowledge and skills and behaviours?
Yeah,
or just knowledge and skills, this one? Okay. Anyone going to struggle with it? Okay, that's good. If you are, do let me know and I'll sort something out. We spoke before. One of the questions you came up with was submission date, and that was one that whilst the video was on my other computer was able to have a quick look. It's definitely 19th of Feb. Okay. Right, so what we'll do is we're going to have a little break and then we're going to come back and look at communication techniques. So I will stop this recording, and the idea is then that we have, if they all save as they should, we'll have a series of recordings that go for each of the answers. So that one will be like, so a 3 point, I'll label them accordingly anyway. So yeah, each learning outcome should have its own one. So about 10-15 minutes, is that okay? So should we come back at 22? I make it 26 minutes past. Is 22 okay for everyone?
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks ever so much. Thank you.